Hi, hello. I have a new avatar now. I made it myself. Look at them, they're so cute and cool. And I don't know why I put all the effort into making them and then immediately wanted to redraw them according to the style of this video. So here, this is what they're gonna be looking like throughout this video. Yeah. Many of you who watched my Tomie Did Nothing Wrong video a few months ago really wanted me to do a video on Junji Ito's Uzumaki. So naturally, I procrastinated on it for 3 months, and then when I was halfway through writing this very script, YouTuber and horror aficionado Wendigoon released his own video on it. I was gobsmacked. I was devastated, I fear. I started giving out invitations for the hashtag Gramilla's Over party. I meandered through my list of other YouTube video ideas trying to figure out if I should toss the whole Uzumaki thing out entirely or postpone it for 7 years to wait for all of my body cells to completely refresh and hope that no one would remember that he already posted a video on it by the time mine came out. And then I stopped being a coward, took off my depression sweatpants, and started operating by the two cakes philosophy. I hope you all still want to hear my take on this series of short stories by Junji Ito, because I will ultimately come to a very unique conclusion by the end of it. I'm not going to cover the events in these chapters panel by panel, but I will give you the necessities as to how this story goes. Then we'll jump into my weird interpretations of the Uzumaki story. And after that, as a treat, I'm going to talk about the official Uzumaki film released in 2000, which is interesting. Sounds good? Let's jump in. Similar to Tomie, the Uzumaki omnibus that you'll see sold in bookstores or online is a giant aggregate of multiple separate chapters, some of which connect to each other, but most of which can kind of stand on their own as long as you get the basic premise of the book. The word Uzumaki means spiral in Japanese, and this book is chock full of them. The synopsis for this anthology is: Kurozucho, a small fog-bound town on the coast of Japan, is cursed. According to Shuichi Saito, the withdrawn boyfriend of teenager Kirie Goshima, their town is haunted not by a person or being, but a pattern. Uzumaki, the spiral, the hypnotic shape of the world. Okay, let's talk about what happens in this story chapter by chapter. Starting with Chapter 1. We meet our protagonist, a high schooler named Kirie Goshima who grew up in the town of Kurozucho for her entire life. Every day she goes to meet her boyfriend Shuichi Saito, who is the most depressed man I have ever seen. Shuichi goes to a high school in a different city named Midoriyamashi and comes back by train every day. In these early panels, Kirie has to run to meet up with Shuichi, and there are already strange details that Ito gives us. The grass she stands on is curling, and as she runs through her town, a brief blast of wind streaks by her. She also sees Shuichi's father, who's crouched in an alleyway, unmoving, staring at a snail. This is the stuff your unemployed friend does at 2 p.m. on a Thursday. When we actually see Kirie and Shuichi together, it's very plain. They don't act very much like they are in love or even fond of each other. They just seem boringly comfortable. But later in the series, there are moments where they're forced to keep going for the sake of each other. It just feels like a kind of awkward relationship they have. Shuichi starts talking about how he suddenly wants to run away from Kurozucho with Kirie because their hometown makes him feel dizzy now. He randomly says the town is contaminated with spirals, which of course catches Kirie off guard. He's being very conspiracy theory coded, but Kirie is the queen of IDGAF, and she's like, oh, alright, anyways. Later in the chapter, we see Kirie's father, who makes ceramics for a living. Shuichi's dad has shown up to Kirie's house, and he's chatting it up with Mr. Goshima, telling him that the beauty of pottery is in the art of the spiral. He's being very totally normal about it, too. When Kirie tells this to Shuichi a day later, he's like, babes, my dad is actually insane. But Kirie is being so cute and positive about all of this. She's like, it's not weird. It's fine he has a little strange hobby. I love her so much. She's like, I rebuke whatever negative energy that embodies you, Shuichi. She's protecting her peace. Shuichi says his dad quit his job, started a spiral collection, and just stares at the collection all day. There's a commotion at his house, and they run in to find that Mrs. Saito threw out all of Mr. Saito's spirals so he could get off his ass and get a job. Of course, Shuichi's dad freaks out a bit, but ultimately he doesn't mind, since he tells them that he can simply express the spiral through his own body now, and does this. Where's the ambulance? Where are the doctors? Why is no one calling the police? A few days pass, and I guess this all blows over because Kirie's dad sends her to deliver a piece of his pottery to Shuichi's dad, and when she steps into their house, he's there. He tells her he doesn't need his Etsy order anymore because now he can conjure the spiral out of his body. Like, for example, his tongue. Kirie understandably screams at this sight and she just runs away. And then suddenly we're at a funeral for Shuichi's dad. Man died from the spiral, so now they're cremating him. And Kirie is talking to Shuichi like, so what's going on? And Shuichi pisses me off sometimes. So Kirie thinks his dad passed away by falling down the stairs because that's what Shuichi's family has been telling everyone. But then Shuichi is like, God, Kirie, oh, you're so clueless. Oh my gosh, like, you're so stupid. How could you not know the thing I explicitly didn't tell you about? And Kirie is so patient with him, bless her heart. He explains that he and his mom did visit a mental hospital to start the process of getting his father committed, but by the time they got home, they went looking for him and found him lodged inside of a wooden tub. This man has, inch by inch, wormed his way into a perfect spiral. He became what he so dearly loved. This is a double-page spread, and the art here is amazing. The hatching of the lines creating movement, the energy that a spiral shape creates on a page, the way that the spiral shape is separated into these, like, landmarks that are also recognizable parts of human anatomy, like the butt and the feet. The way the hands are folded like a rose in the center of it all, and then the horrible way that the hands are still recognizable even as they're bent into such an unrecognizable shape. And I love that Mr. Saito kept his glasses on. Was perfectly fine abandoning his humanity and mortal form, but not abandoning those frames. Most artists, especially comic or manga artists, don't usually give characters glasses, so I do appreciate the fact that Shuichi and his dad and a lot of other characters in Junji Ito's stories have glasses, because I know how tough it is to be an artist and realize that you've created a character design that is gonna be a pain to redraw perfectly in every frame. Back to the story. Shuichi is explaining all of this horror to Kirie, and then his mother notices that the smoke from her husband's ashes is turning into a spiral cloud. This is when shit begins to go down. Chapter 2. Everyone in town is realizing how weird this spiral cloud is, and they all say it's an omen. They're right, because this is the beginning of a long and wild series of events. Some horrific, some humorous, but all of it will be disturbing. The smoke starts swirling down and falls into the center of Dragonfly Pond. Remember that detail, because it's gonna pop up a lot more. Meanwhile, Shuichi's mom fully breaks down, and I'm not talking about dancing. She develops spiral phobia, and she has to be put in a hospital. Some time passes, and Shuichi and Kirie see that she's had to have her head covered because she's terrified that her hair is gonna curl up, and she also has to have her hands covered because one night she saw that her own fingerprints were spiral shapes, so she decided to not have fingerprints anymore. So needless to say, everyone has to be super careful around her and not trigger her phobia in any way. There's a scene where Shuichi and his mom are doing a routine checkup with the head doctor, and Shuichi sees a diagram on the wall that clearly labels the cochlea in the inner ear, which is a spiral, so he freaks out, and he and the doctor immediately get rid of it before she can see the diagram, because they don't know what she's gonna do if she know about the cochlea. It doesn't even work, because for some reason, in the night, Miss Saito has this dream where there's a centipede crawling into her ear. Okay, Tokyo Ghoul moment. And then her husband appears to her the next night and tells her there are spirals in her ears, so she's convinced there are. She rips out her IV and grabs a pair of scissors. Why did they let her keep scissors in her room if they know she's a highly destructive patient? And why is her IV drip made of glass instead of the little pouch they usually use? So, of course, Mrs. Saito uses the scissors to make herself coherent. It's not clear how much time passes, but we do get a short explanation that she is not well, and she is unwell all the way up until she passes away in the hospital. Again, we don't know how long it was after her ear incident, but she does pass away. And when she's cremated, her ashes also create a giant black cloud like Mr. Saito, and they swirl all the way down into the lake. I'm going to kind of breeze through the next few chapters. Really, the main through line is that the spiral curse gets stronger and stronger and also displays itself in very unique ways according to everyone's different personalities. In chapter 3, Kirie is chatting with a friend, Azami, who's known for being gorgeous and getting whatever boy she wants. That's like the 3 types of women that Junji Ito writes: gorgeous, suffering, or old. Azami claims that her power to attract any boy she wants is from this scar on her forehead. Not sure why this is treated like some evil thing. Like, if she's popular, she's popular. She's not mean or anything. She seems pretty chill, but all of her classmates hate her. Azami meets Shuichi, who can sense the spiral in her, and he wants nothing to do with her, which triggers this sort of Tomie-esque obsession on Azami's part to get Shuichi to fall in love with her, even though she's friends with Kirie and knows that Kirie and Shuichi are dating. Over time, Azami's scar turns into a spiral, and it grows and grows until it bores into her skull, and we get the iconic Uzumaki panel that's now on like tote bags and t-shirts and pretty much glues itself to everything that is associated with Junji Ito. She casually eats a guy and then slowly gets sucked into her own spiral and disappears. Chapter 4. Every time someone is cremated in the town, their ashes become a black spiral of smoke and settle down into the middle of Dragonfly Pond. But no one is calling any environmentalists to go out and see what the heck is going on. Kirie is having conversations with her dad that are weird, and he's starting to exhibit strange behavior. He's making a bunch of ceramics that are all coming out lopsided and covered in spiral patterns, and he's like, yep, that's just how they've been turning out lately. But Kirie and her mother are like, those pieces of pottery have screaming faces in them, and those screaming faces look like Shuichi's dead parents. And her dad is like, oh, is that so? Kirie says she's been worried about Shuichi because he's essentially not eating, and now that he has no parents, he just stays inside all day. Why doesn't he just leave town? Anyway, they have him over for dinner and they serve him spiral noodles on a spiral plate, so of course he starts getting spooked. Then Mr. Goshima explains that the reason his new pots are coming out the way they are is because he's using mud from Dragonfly Pond, and ever since then his fired pieces are a little wonky. But he goes on and on about the beauty of the spiral and whatnot. So Shuichi just leaves. He does not stand for possessed pottery. Kirie wants to get to the bottom of this, so she goes to her dad's kiln one night. And yeah, while his ceramics are firing, there are people straight up screaming in there. Tortured souls being baked into frickin' flower vases. The only thing about Uzumaki and other stories from Ito is that things happen a little too quickly, a little too conveniently. Like after the dinner where Shuichi walked out, Kirie began hearing the screams of the souls in her father's studio, but her and her mother just never heard them before until tonight, even though her dad's been doing this for months. So suddenly this one night that Kirie starts hearing the screaming souls is also the one night Shuichi calls her, and somehow over the 3G metered phone line, he manages to catch the screams in the background, and then he hangs up, and then he appears at her dad's studio within 4 milliseconds and is shouting at Kirie's dad. What? Their neighbors must hate this family. Shuichi burns down Mr. Goshima's kiln, and that seems to kind of assuage his obsession with the spirals. Like, now that he has no vehicle through which to conduct his work, nothing escalates and her dad slowly chills out for the rest of the book. Chapter 5. We learn about a young couple who are going through a whole Romeo and Juliet situation. Their families live in the same row house, which are small one-story buildings in this town that are separated into 3 side-by-side living spaces. They live on opposite sides of the row house. We also get a sense that these type of houses are reserved for lower class citizens in general. They're the oldest houses in the town, and they're also mostly run down. Kirie witnesses this boy and girl try and run away together multiple times, only to get dragged back by their toxic parents. At one point, the boy says the families in the row house are twisted, their hearts are bent out of shape. And that's foreshadowing for not only this chapter, but the ending chapters as well. Eventually, this tension escalates, and one day the couple sees a pair of snakes intertwined, making love. So at the end of the chapter, they do the same. They run away, and when their families have them cornered on a beach, the boy and girl decide to hold hands and literally stretch themselves to interlock their bodies, and then they randomly jump into the sea. Chapter 6. Shuichi begins to talk about how people are becoming obsessed with attention, and Kirie sees this firsthand with Sekino, a girl in her class who says that she would love attention. And Sekino says this in response to a boy from their school literally dying by falling off a roof accidentally. But Sekino is telling Kirie that he was just doing it for attention, and she's like, I would love all eyes on me like that. Girl, what? While they're talking later on, Shuichi points out that Kirie's hair is getting long, and soon enough, for some reason, Kirie's hair starts curling into perfect spirals. This is interesting because it's the only time in the series where the spiral directly affects her body. Over time, her hair gets bigger and bigger and everyone starts staring at her. Her hair seems to want attention, so it starts moving on its own and it forces Kirie to go stand in the middle of public places. And also, over time, her hair starts drawing all of her energy, so it makes her tired all the time. I just don't understand how anybody gets any damn work done in this school. Shuichi sees her one day and has the audacity to turn away from her as if she did this. Boy, if you don't! Somehow her friend Sekino gets this ability as well, and the two of them have a hair off. Shuichi kind of becomes collateral damage when he tries to stop them. Kirie wraps him up into a hair burrito, but the weight of him makes her fall over, and I guess that disqualifies her hair from competing, so by default Sekino says she won. So she leaves, and so does everyone else. Now that no one is paying attention, Kirie's hair becomes weak enough for Shuichi to cut through it. And then Kirie rocks her short haircut for the rest of the series. Sekino's hair attaches itself to a power line to try and branch out from it to get even more attention, and the bigger it gets, the more Sekino's energy is drawn from her until she is literally a withered corpse attached to a power line. It's terrifying. Chapter 7. Kirie keeps being annoyed with a younger boy who likes to scare her every now and then. He keeps jumping out to surprise her and talks about how he wants to be her boyfriend, and she's like, yeah, you're like 10 years old, and also I hate you, goodbye and God bless. But he's relentless. He gives her a Jack-in-the-Box as a present, and then naively tries to show her that he loves her so much he has the power to stop cars. So he jumps in front of traffic. Turns out he doesn't have the power to stop cars. I'm sorry, this one panel made me laugh and I feel really bad, but it was just so hilariously unexpected. I will eventually be punished for laughing like that though, because this chapter goes on to be one of the ones that actually physically makes me queasy every time I read it. So his family buries the boy because the town does not like doing cremations anymore because of the smoke thing. It's just too weird for them. After the funeral, Kirie talks to Shuichi about the events. You know, her witnessing literal death in front of her very eyes. And Shuichi is like, well, if you're still unsettled about the whole thing, let's go dig the boy up and put a stake through his heart. What is wrong with this man? The two of them are in the graveyard digging up the boy's grave, and he bursts out of his coffin looking like this. Horrifying. And it starts chasing them, bouncing after them, and gradually his body parts start falling off. Then he grows a spring and bounces after them like a Jack-in-the-Box. Eventually the body falls and the spring turns out to be a suspension spring from the car that hit the boy. You'd think the people that sewed him back together after the car crash would notice something that gigantic sticking out of him, but okay. And Shuichi and Kirie act like this discovery settles everything, and so they're like, well, brush his hands off. All in a day's work, it was just the suspension spring. And then they leave his body there. Like, what? You two are criminals! Chapter 8. Kirie has a student in her class that's known for being lethargic or sloth-like, and the kids in her class bully him really badly for no other reason than he's chubby and I guess he's not the brightest person in the world. Eventually, the student keeps coming late to class every day and is covered in this weird, slimy sweat. This one group of guys keeps targeting him, and Kirie just watches like, damn, I love being a bystander who refuses to intervene. Soon this boy turns into a full-ass snail. His eyes push themselves into eye stalks, and his whole face morphs into a snail's face, or lack thereof. His parents won't accept that their child is a snail now, so he becomes a weird, class pet for the entire class, as if this is the most normal thing in the world. It's kind of wholesome, but it's entirely messed up. They give him water, and they make, a little enclosure for him to live in. Soon enough, the bully that used to torment this boy is also turning into a snail slowly. So within a few days, they have 2 pet snails. They put them in the same enclosure, and within minutes, these snail boys are, mating, apparently. Love wins. One day, the 2 of them escape their enclosure, and the teacher drags the entire class out into the mountains to look for them. Again, how the hell is anything getting done in this school? Y'all need to be in class. The teacher leads the class to a small cluster of snail eggs that one of the boys has laid, and then he destroys the eggs because he says, those gay snails are a freak of nature and they shouldn't be allowed to breed. How very snomophobic of you, sir. And guess what? A few days later, the teacher turns into a snail too. That's what your ass gets. Chapter 9. A random defunct lighthouse in Kurosucho begins working again, and the townspeople start getting hypnotized by the swirling light. Most of Kirie's family is sane enough to stay away from the lighthouse, but Kirie's little brother is captivated by it. She warns him, but one day, he and his friends run over to the lighthouse, and she has to chase down after them. There's a long spiral staircase in the interior, and Kirie finds the charred bodies of men still inside. Why does no one call the police around here? She keeps pressing on and finds the boys staring at a giant spiral-shaped melted lens in the middle. She also notices the glass in the lighthouse is melted, and she's like, okay, when this light turns on, it has the power to literally fry glass and people, and we need to be out of here before that happens or we'll become pulled pork barbecue. Of course, sunset happens immediately, so the light starts whirring up, and Kirie has to grab the boys, and they all have to run for their lives. If the searing hot light catches them, they're dead, so they sprint down the spiral staircase. One boy is actually caught up in the light, and the force of his body incinerating is what pushes Kirie and the other boys out of the lighthouse safely, with some minor burns on their part. Thankfully, they do actually send paramedics to retrieve the bodies, and the lighthouse just goes on shining in the night. Chapter 10. Kirie has to spend time in the hospital because of the burns she got from the lighthouse. There's a new problem in town where mosquitoes have started biting people, to the point where some people are dying because of too much bite. And also there's like a fleet of pregnant women who get transferred into Kirie's hospital because of the recent panic over the mosquito bites. Kirie has a cousin who shares a hospital room with her, and when Shuichi visits her, he sees a mosquito in the room and is so paranoid about them that he empties a can of bug spray on the spot. Thank you, Shuichi. He says only female mosquitoes drink blood, and for that matter, only pregnant female mosquitoes. Of course, his intuition turns out to be correct because later in the chapter, it turns out the pregnant women are going through the hospital with hand drills and poking holes in people to drink their blood. To sustain their babies, I guess. Shuichi's bug spray can comes in handy, and Kirie uses it to ward off the women, but the town just carries on and these women will soon give birth. Chapter 11. The women gave birth. Like some weird hive mind, they all have babies around the exact same time, and they're fawning over them, and so are all of the other hospital patients. Reminder that these babies are not normal. They are blood-fed babies. Also, the hospital completely coincidentally begins serving patients a new kind of fungus mushroom thing, but Kirie refuses to eat it. Instead, she passes by the nursery where babies are actually speaking real human adult words and chatting it up about how they want to go back into their womb again. And then one of them conveniently shows off its umbilical cord, which is still attached, and I guess there's a mushroom-like placenta fungus attached to it. That's some Last of Us type nonsense. Kirie goes to find her cousin who's in the operating room, and she bursts in to find a doctor who just finished putting her cousin's baby back in there. He explains to Kirie that the babies are unnatural, and as much as you try to cut their umbilical cord, they grow back. So of course, logically, he says this must mean the babies want to be back in the womb. Alright. Her cousin doesn't seem too bothered by this, instead just going back to her vampiric blood-drinking ways. And she grows a long tongue, one of them that are blood-sucking tongues like the mosquitoes have. She ends up draining the doctor of his blood, and Kirie is out of there so fast, she has had it. I feel like these past two chapters are the ones that make the least sense in terms of how it directly relates to the spiral. It's just so out there. It's my least favorite section of this book. Chapter 12. This is what I consider to be stage 2 of the Curse of Kurozucho. A sudden hurricane forms over the town and it hovers there, refusing to pass over. Kirie and her family briefly talk about the eye of the storm and how it's just been there over the town for forever. Suddenly at night, Kirie realizes the wind is howling her name, and then Shuichi shows up the next day and tells her that the storm is looking for her. And as soon as he says this, the sky clouds up and Shuichi tells her that the eye of the storm is on her, as in the storm is strangely interested in her. Yo, tropical weather system smasher pass. Shuichi tries to get her to safety and he's being so rude to her, like he's so condescending, asking her why she doesn't understand anything. And it's like, my guy, when I see a storm over my town, I don't automatically assume that it's hunting me down specifically. A woman passes by them and the storm sucks her up into the sky before slamming her back down because it realizes that she's not Kirie. So the two of them run into the sewers, but somehow the water spouts upwards and they're thrown into the storm in the sky. All it does, though, is drop them into the middle of Dragonfly Pond, and then they're just fished out of the pond later, and then the storm gets sucked into the pond as well. Chapter 13. Turns out the hurricane completely cleared a perfect circle of land around Dragonfly Pond, including Kirie's family house, so now her family has to try and find a new place to stay. They end up being assigned to one of the row houses, which they're not totally thrilled about because, again, these are supposed to be the rundown, old, poor houses in town. Why don't they live with Shuichi? He literally lives in a house by himself now that his parents are gone. Also, he's not even out of high school, right? Shouldn't social services have come and done something about the fact that he's a minor with no legal guardian? They have a neighbor in the row house, Mr. Wakabayashi, who is very pretty, and I'm sure he's gonna be such a normal person. As they live in the house, Kirie's family start growing these horrible spiral-shaped skin growths and warts on their bodies. It looks like it only affects those in the row houses, and their neighbors on one side have been completely covered in calluses, and one of them dies from it. This freaks Kirie out, but she has more problems than just that, because turns out Mr. Wakabayashi is a creep who stares at her through peepholes he's made in the wall. A second hurricane begins raging over town, and meanwhile the family's skin condition just keeps getting worse and worse. Somehow, Wakabayashi stands there by the peephole for so long, or at least for so often, that he starts growing these spiral spikes, and at the end of the chapter he is completely turned into some sort of horned up monster, literally and figuratively, and he dies via a convenient piece of broken wood to the neck. Then shortly after, the second hurricane also gets drained into Dragonfly Pond. Chapter 14. This is stage 3, the final stage of the series, and the spiral curse. Kurozucho has become an absolute hellhole. At this point, 6 hurricanes have hit the town, one after the other, presumably all of them spiraling into the pond one by one. We see a camera crew preparing to enter the town, and they're talking about how nobody can establish communication anymore from the outside, so the entire town is dead silent and no one knows what's happening. Apparently rescue teams have tried to come into the town, but they never return. Case in point, the news van is hit with an errant twister, and the only reporter, Chie, survives. Throughout this chapter, she wanders the town, and eventually she becomes like a secondary character who tags along with Kirie, Shuichi, and the Goshima family. Through Chie, we also learn what Kurozucho has become during this time skip. Now, Dragonfly Pond is just a whirlpool. People also now have the power to use their breaths or their bodies to create violent tornadoes at the slightest movement. Rescue helicopters are being taken down. Even entire fleets of ships are being swallowed by the ocean, which has also turned into a whirlpool. The entire town has become nothing but rubble, but the only structures that seem to be immune to the spiral, for whatever reason, are the ancient row houses. Chie sees the state of the row houses where most of the townsfolk are forced to live together. Kirie and her family have been sheltering people to the point where it's almost too crowded to stay there. I just love Kirie. She's so kind and polite through the entire thing, even though everyone is suffering equally. At this point, I was surprised to see that the townspeople are talking about the spiral and saying that there is a force that won't let even a cell phone signal escape the town. So there is some self-awareness of this weird curse going on. Shuichi is in the corner of the house alone in the fetal position, muttering about spirals and how this town has gone insane. This is illustrated by the fact that a group of annoying kids keeps trying to blow tornadoes into the row houses, and the people in the house fight back by flinging whirlwinds at them. Chapter 15. When this chapter starts, people have now started riding the tornadoes. There are gangs of wind riders choosing to fly around and destroy buildings because they ain't got shit else to do. I'd probably be right up there with them. We learn that the snail phenomenon has not stopped either. People are still turning into snails for whatever reason. Kirie, her family, Shuichi, and Chie all get kicked out of the increasingly crowded row house, even though that was their house to begin with. They come across a gang of tornado chasers who are roasting and eating one of the snail people. This is dark. The guys in this gang are a bit too much, so eventually they end up starting a fight, a skirmish, a little kerfuffle, if you will. And of course, this culminates in everyone getting blown away with whirlwinds. Kirie and Chie get caught up in it, but they're saved by Shuichi, who is still very depressed and muttering about how insane his reality is. Chapter 16. Rescue teams keep trying to enter Kurozucho, only to be stranded there when they realize there's no way out of the town. Chie tried to go back through the tunnel one time, but it kept winding until she felt dizzy, and she just couldn't keep going. No one can escape through the sea because of the giant whirlpool on the coast, and even the mountains seem risky. So everyone in town is stuck. At this point, Kirie's father has completely gone missing, her mother is injured, and all of them are near starving. Shuichi says that people are possibly turning into snails because the spiral is catching up to them. So somehow they're moving too slowly and the curse is overtaking them. They try and go back to the row houses, but it's so crowded that no one will let them in. One guy yanks the door open to the house, and it turns out the people in there have piled onto each other so much that every person in the row house has become tangled into each other. This reminds me of that one part from the horror game Inside. It's interesting to see this because this means that being in a row house does not mean you're fully exempt from the curse. In fact, you're just going to be subject to a different flavor of the curse. Still, this guy decides that row houses are the safest option, so he starts building onto the house to extend it. Kirie and the others are like, we're not messing with this anymore, so they leave. They briefly team up with another small group of reporters, and one of them has already begun turning into a snail. That night, both groups find the remnants of a cooked snail person, a snurson if you will. So the group, finally cornered by desperation, all have to actually eat the meat to survive. I was shocked because normally in horror stories, the protagonists never resort to anything that we think of as immoral. It's just the sad icing on the cake of despair. Their group has been hiding out underneath a portion of a fallen house, but when they get back from this excursion, Kirie can't find her mother anywhere, and the shack has been blown onto her little brother because of a whirlwind. When they dig her little brother out of the debris, he has unfortunately started turning into a snail, and we know that this is an irreversible transformation, but Kirie still makes up her mind to try and escape Kudozucho to save her brother. Chapter 17. Kirie, her brother, Chie, and Shuichi begin walking towards the mountains to try and escape town. The entire time Shuichi is muttering about how useless it all is, and keeps saying there's no escape. You don't have to travel with them, Shuichi. You can lay down in a gutter somewhere if you really think it's all over. While up in the mountains, they look down to see that all of the row houses were built to face Dragonfly Pond for some reason. And there's already a ton of construction that's taking place so that the row houses can be extended horizontally. The group walks for some time, but predictably, it's not easy to escape. The grass and the trees are spiraling, they keep going around in circles. At one point, the hands on someone's clock are warped out of place, so they have no idea how much time is passing. Eventually, they encounter that group of reporters again, the ones who ate the snail meat. These guys have one of their members on a leash because they know he's turning into a snail and they're treating him like an emergency food supply. That's fucked up. Of course, within minutes, their friend fully snailifies and the men instantly jump on him. Instead of cooking him, one guy suggests some escargot à la raw, so he crawls up into his friend's shell to chew on his face. Horrifying. Kirie and her group start inching away from them like, oh, okay, we'll just leave you to it. Remember that her brother is also turning into a snail, so she knows shit is gonna go down if these guys see that she has a snack-sized snail on her shoulder. Eventually though, poor little Mitsuo finally becomes a snail, despite Kirie and Shuichi doing everything they can to delay his transformation. The tiny tufts of his hair kinda kill me, like it's simultaneously adorable and dreadful. There is a beautiful fine line between comedy and horror, and Junji Ito manages to toe that line very skillfully in a lot of his work. The snail eater guys catch up with them like, hey, I'm sorry, did we scare you off? That's crazy. They see that her brother is a snail, so Kirie urges her brother to crawl onto the side of a cliff by poking him with a stick, because he kept trying to crawl back to her, which I thought was so sad. Her brother is now safe, and that's the last we see of him in the series. Turns out the snail guys weren't really a threat because they get so worked up talking about eating snails that they crunch themselves into spirals. This guy especially is a little freak. He was talking about being inside those wet, wonderful curves. Like, bro, calm down. Bro really said, thinking about my homie's curves and his interior space make me wanna... and then bro becomes the spiral. Have some decency. There are snail children around. There are snildren around. Okay, before I get into the final 3 chapters of the series, I want to throw this lost chapter in here because I don't want it to completely take away from the ending of the book, which is pretty damn interesting, but I did still want to mention that this chapter does exist, and it takes place way back before the town began going to shit with all the hurricanes and stuff. It's an okay chapter about Shuichi discovering a new galaxy through a telescope, and then he sets off this domino effect around town where everyone is starting to see new galaxies and they eventually gain the ability to telepathically talk to each other through radio waves. Of course, things get crazy. People are threatening other people over who gets to take credit for finding the galaxies. and it ends with one guy getting his head exploded by radio waves, and then he ascends into the sky to become another galaxy. Yeah, okay, I see why this was left out. Although I would have taken this chapter over the mosquito women. Okay, back to the end game of Uzumaki. Chapter 18. This is quite possibly my favorite part of the book. I think these last few chapters are the final death throes of Kudozucho. Then again, with the way that the series ends, I'm not sure if these are death throes or birthing contractions or the newborn cries of Kudozucho, but you'll see what I mean. The group is still trying to walk around, but they accept that they're never gonna get out of the town. So Kirie admits defeat, and she says that she just wants to find her parents. That's all. And then whatever happens, happens. At least she's trying to give herself goals to keep herself moving. By the time they wind their way back to town, they look down and Kudozucho has become a spiral labyrinth. Somehow time has dilated to the point where they've been gone for years, and now all of the row houses have been horizontally connected to form a spiral that centers around Dragonfly Pond. They realize that now that the row houses are all one unit, they've created this long spiral alleyway in between them. So the group walk down the alleyway, realizing that there are no longer any whirlwinds or hurricanes blowing around. They try and peek into the row houses to ask where Kirie's parents are, but no one answers them properly. At this point, everyone has turned into a giant flesh amalgamation thingy, and they just throw dead bodies at them and ask them to toss them out. A guy comes along and he's made it his job to clean up the bodies. He tells him that Kirie's parents are by Dragonfly Pond last time he saw them, in the center of the spiral, because her dad was there trying to make pottery still. Shuichi mentions that this town probably has this happen every few centuries. He talks about how the row houses are generations old, and at one point they had found an old map in a row house that had an image of a spiral city on it. So Shuichi's personal theory is that this town somehow renews itself every few hundred years, only to eventually fall back into the spiral curse time and time again. The row houses aren't fully connected yet. There are certain tiny sections that haven't been filled, but the people inside, you know what, I guess it's more fitting to say like the one conjoined citizen of Kudozucho, the uni-citizen inside of the row house, they've been building feverishly. And so Chie, Kirie, and Shuichi try and run through a gap to take a shortcut, but Chie literally gets built over before she can escape. She got. And then something horrific happens. Once the townspeople cover up this one gap, the row houses are now fully finished, fully connected into a great spiral, and then they hear a giant whooshing sound, and suddenly the houses are completely empty. As if every living thing in those houses got sucked up through a silly straw and deposited somewhere. Imagining a mass of hundreds of bodies getting vacuumed up through those row houses and rushing along the walls in one giant heap, that image is so disturbing. Now that the row houses are empty, Kirie and Shuichi feel that they're the only ones in the entire town who are left. They both calmly walk through the row houses towards the center of the spiral Dragonfly Pond. The pond has dried up, and now it's nothing but a gigantic spiral staircase heading downwards for miles. Shuichi takes Kirie's hand and they go in together. Chapter 19. This chapter is called Completion, which I think is interesting. Like, this collection of events has been a ritual of some sort. The two of them are headed down the stairs when they encounter a random person who was left behind from the row houses. He asks them to take him down because he says, "I hear there's something beautiful down there." They just kind of like try and step over him like, ew. but he bites Shuichi's ankle and the two of them fall over the edge of the staircase and into the chasm below. Kirie is now finally utterly alone, the only one left standing. Girl, I would have gone right back up those stairs and lived out my days. I'm sorry, I just could not handle this. Nevertheless, Kirie presses on and gets to the very end of the staircase. She's past the point of no return, truly. There ain't no jumping back up that. She falls all the way down onto a sea of bodies. There's a spiral structure jutting up inside of this cave, and it looks almost like a threaded screw or a drill piece. Besides that, and besides the giant sea of bodies, Kirie finds that people are staring up at this huge, glowing city of spirals. Some sort of metropolis, which she finds utterly beautiful. This image has definitely stuck with me. This is what I think of every single time I think of Uzumaki, because there's something so grand about it. The structure is gigantic, and there Kirie is just a girl who tried to escape whatever the hell was happening to her town and her loved ones, and after all that fighting and despair and struggling to survive, here she is at the bottom of a well with everyone else. She's intact, but what was the point of it all? Especially as she's looking up at the city of spirals. It feels like it's rewarding her, but also like it's taunting her. This panel simultaneously gives us the answer for all of the events in the story, at the same time that it tells us that we will never ever really figure out exactly what this is or why it's here. And Kirie still thinks it's beautiful, which makes us also want to give in as the readers. We also want to accept this unknowable thing that's been put before us, something that is so incomprehensible and distant. And at the same time, it almost feels evil to look at it and call it beautiful because of the legitimately horrible things it's done to everyone in the story thus far. Like, people have died. Kirie sees her parents, who have calcified into stone because of how long they had supposedly been down there in the cave. So she realizes that she was trying to find them when they'd probably been long dead for years and years. She finds Shuichi, who tells her that he can't go on any further than this, and she agrees with him. He says the ruins are somehow a living creature, in a way. The two of them have made it to the center, at least, and they finally know what's happening in the town, but these are the consequences. The entire time, they knew they were spiraling down with everyone else, but they still had naive hopes that they were exempt from fully succumbing to the spiral. And I guess technically they haven't succumbed to it, they haven't been changed, they haven't gone crazy, but they are still there. In that moment, they both choose to give up. They hold hands, and then their arms spiral around each other. Then we see that as soon as they give up, the city begins humming, and the drill-shaped structure moves up to plug Dragonfly Pond Basin. In the final panels of the book, it says that the spiral is complete. So the curse was over the same moment it began, the endless frozen moment I spent in Shuichi's arms. And it will be the same moment when it ends again, when the next Kurozucho is built amidst the ruins of the old one, when the eternal spiral awakes once more. That's how the story ends. Let's jump into my analysis of Uzumaki. I tried to interpret this a bunch of different ways at first. I did take an approach where I thought that maybe this was a story about mass hysteria and how the population can fall victim to wanting to believe something happens so badly that it does happen in their minds. I thought this was why people who wanted attention grew hair spirals, and people who wanted their babies to be healthy drank the life force of others. I thought maybe at first that the spiral curse of Kurozucho was the work of like a demented genie type creature, something that could grant wishes but only once it had been warped enough beyond recognition. But I tossed that out because it doesn't explain so many of the occurrences in the stories. Like, Kirie never wished to get picked up by a hurricane, and I don't know anyone who wholeheartedly wishes they were a snail. I also tried to take a biblical approach to my analysis, and I do think that this one has some promise, although it's not what I'm gonna really focus on. But I guess I can explain it a little bit. I feel like, in a way, the town of Kurozucho and the events of Uzumaki are an inverse Garden of Eden. I was going to argue that most of the events in the book simply do not take off until Shuichi is the first to mention them. Time and time again, Shuichi is the first person to voice any concerns or omens about certain things that would normally be harmless, and then shortly after he's the one to verbally point out how something is cursed, then it becomes cursed. I felt like Shuichi was some sort of villain, that his character isn't a harbinger of doom, but rather an usher of doom, a catalyst. He's the one who mentions that Kirie's hair is getting long, and the next day her hair is possessed with spirals. He's the one who mutters about how the couple in the row houses are doomed, and how Kirie should give up on them. And then sure enough, at the end, when Shuichi is there with Kirie, watching the couple try and escape, that's when the two of them begin twisting. Especially in the lost chapter, he's the one to find the new galaxy, and suddenly that obsession starts spreading around to the townspeople until they're killing each other over it. I felt like he was just a little bit suspicious. I was gonna argue that he was some sort of inverse Adam figure, bringing Kirie the cursed fruit of knowledge of the spiral curse. Or damn, maybe he's the serpent, I don't know. Every time he tries to convince her to buy into the curse, or even just brings the spiral curse to her attention, things in town go wrong, until she's the one that becomes the main witness because now she harbors that cursed knowledge within her. So I thought maybe it was plausible that this was a reverse Eden situation with Shuichi being Adam and Kirie being Eve, only this time Adam is bringing with him the dark knowledge of a curse and giving it to Eve, and because of that fact, the two of them begin spiraling their fate towards something. And instead of the biblical story where Adam and Eve are cast out of the beautiful garden and go on to live shoddy lives of pain and grime, here it seems to be the opposite. Because of their knowledge, the town draws them closer and closer to a beautiful shining city and takes everyone in town but them. Until the very end, when the both of them arrive to the underground city, and that marks the completion of the curse, like some sort of fucked up reverse rapture. So is this spiral city Eden? Is it God? That's where my theory fell apart. I mean, it could be a god or some type of god beast, but I feel like that was a bit too predictable of an interpretation. And also, I didn't feel like sticking to such a safe Western Christian narrative for this Japanese horror manga series, so let's just scratch that theory too. I wasn't sure how to interpret Kirie and Shuichi either. For Kirie, it's hard to place just what she is. She isn't a final girl. She doesn't escape the horror. She doesn't even kill the monster, but she isn't quite a martyr because she doesn't die against her will for any one specific cause. She willingly succumbs to what's been haunting them, and she finds genuine comfort in it. And I've already talked about how Shuichi is like a constant siren for danger, but also chooses to stick with Kirie or even save her from some of the danger. I also struggled with the idea that both of them needed to be witnesses for some reason, like the curse wanted them to see everything, because the completion at the end only happens not when they both fall into the chasm, but when they both accept that they are part of the spiral. Now I have a theory that's a little bit more solidified. I think Uzumaki is a story about a town infected with a disease. Not just any old disease, but an ancient one that's rooted in the soil of the mountains itself, where the town is nested. A disease that somehow not only affects the host's mental state, but also its physical state, and in the later stages, it can even affect the host's place in time. And when I say host, I don't only mean humans. I think this disease is contagious through the grass, the trees, the water, the air particles, even the fabric of space and reality. The obvious origin of this disease, the heart of the contagion, lies below the town. This radiation-like disease has a long gestation period, but the symptoms are always spirals. And the symptoms continue to get worse and worse until it leads to death or total transformation or both. Now I know what you might be thinking. Grimmel, you're basically describing some sort of illness that transcends space and time. A psychic ailment accompanied with physical supernatural occurrences. Isn't that just a curse? Which is what the book says it is? I argue that this can't be a curse. When I think of a curse, I think of a curse as static, right? Static and consistent, and usually only affecting a specific target. Let's look at the video game What Remains of Edith Finch. When we think of a curse, like a family curse, we expect that maybe every generation or every other generation will succumb to this curse and some won't. But even if they do, even if the curse affects targets in different ways, still ultimately every victim of a curse ends the same. The family curse in Edith Finch is that everyone will die prematurely, or at least close to everyone, but there will always be one member of the family line that survives to continue the lineage. Even though the deaths are all different, there's still a through line, and it will keep going on and on and on until someone breaks the curse or until it's satisfied. I don't know. But Kudozucho is different. You can't really say that this is a curse because there's no real consistency. I mean, towards the end of the book, we get hints that maybe this town succumbs to spirals every few years, but then ending the book by saying that time folds in on itself and the moment the spiral ends is the moment it begins, that's just strange. It makes me doubt that we can even know for sure if this isn't the first time it's happened. I just don't like assuming that this has happened multiple times over and over again because, as we know, the end of the book is a time paradox. It's too ambiguous to be a curse, and it feels too big. Most curses don't have the power to possess hurricanes and make them sentient, and most curses don't lead victims all to one central location. Again, that feels more like a ritual rather than something that exists purely to ruin someone's lives. In the case of Uzumaki, it's completely halting the lives of every townsperson. Even people who left the town early on can't even escape because it's mentioned in one chapter that people who die away from town will still have their ashes fly back to Dragonfly Pond. And I don't like the idea of a curse, specifically because it insinuates that someone did something wrong. But there was no inciting occurrence that made Kurozucho cursed. And it makes me feel bad for the victims, like the young boy who got hit by a car and turned into a spring, the elderly people in the row houses who died from skin conditions. I just don't like the idea that everyone in this town has done something wrong or is a part of something wrong, so they are being punished. Plus, it doesn't really explain why not everyone falls victim to the curse. Why is Kirie's mother always level-headed, but Kirie's father and brother got captured by it? Instead, that's why I think Uzumaki is about an intense supernatural disease. It's something that spreads throughout the town gradually, and then begins to weave its way through the entire population until nobody can escape. By the end, the disease has even lodged itself in trees and the tunnel in the nearby ocean. It's like living things and unliving things don't matter. This is an illness that penetrates every atom of the world around it. It's some kind of disease that's similar to radiation. It targets everything, it covers a wide area, it spreads and spreads. But unlike radiation, some people seem to be highly susceptible to it and others can be fully immune. So here's my full interpretation of the events of Uzumaki. The city underneath Kurozucho is a giant organic creature made up of spirals. For whatever reason, it has been mostly dormant for years. Or maybe it's been dormant for forever, I don't know. I'm still unsure if this is the first time it's woken up or if this is one of the many times. It's so hard to tell when the last panel suggests a time paradox anyways, but this creature is there, under the city, and for whatever reason it has begun to seep out a type of spiral infection. In the very first panel of the book, the spirals are already showing in the leaves and the clouds. Let's say that this is the first phase of the infection process. I think Shuichi Saito is patient 0 for the Uzumaki disease. I know that sounds weird, but going back to my earlier observations, so much of the spiral illness originates from him and his own dizziness that he has when he enters the town. As soon as he tells Kirie about it, he's the one who sets off the events in the stories. I mean, yeah, we can think that he's just psychic. Maybe he just has really good premonition powers. I mean, he could, or he could be a partial cause of everything. I think Shuichi, for whatever reason, is the first to fully catch this illness, and it starts from him and radiates outwards until the entire town is engulfed in spiral contamination. So if Shuichi is patient 0, I think Kirie would be an asymptomatic carrier for this spiral infection. Both of them go through this book largely unharmed, even though there was a moment where Kirie had a little bit of the spiral stuff happening with her hair, and then it gets removed, and then nothing ever physically changes around her again. I think the two of them are accidentally and unknowingly helping spread the spiral disease that this underground creature needs them to spread. So all it takes is a little bit of psychic pain for Shuichi, and from there, his father gets sick, his mother gets sick, Kirie's father gets sick, then things keep building outwards and outwards. Kirie's classmate falls to the illness, and then it's only when she starts hanging out with this young couple that they get the idea to twist like coiled snakes. Shuichi starts talking about Kirie's hair, and immediately her hair is affected. Within days after Kirie's hair, her closest friend Sekino also gets her hair infected as well. A boy obsessed with Kirie falls victim to the curse only when Kirie and Shuichi dig his body up. Kirie's classmates begin falling victim, and then her teacher, people in the row houses start turning into globs of flesh, and it happened in the row house where Kirie's family lived first. I could go on and on and on about it. All of the stuff is happening around the two of them, almost like a chain of contagion. Or a spiral of contagion in this case. That alone doesn't fully explain why certain people are immune and others aren't. Like, shouldn't every single one of her classmates be infected then? Why is her mother not going crazy and spouting about spirals? I have a sub-theory for this theory. I think that in order to be susceptible to the spiral radiation disease, you have to have one of two traits: obsession or depression. Let me explain. Every single person who creates physical manifestations of the spiral disease are people who were, in some way, overly obsessed with some aspect of their lives. And then the disease made their obsession consume them. Azami wanted to draw in boys, right? So in the end, she was able to literally suck them in like a vacuum. Sekino was obsessed with attention, so she wanted Kirie's living hair. The lovers were obsessed with being together. The women in the hospital were obsessed with the health of their babies. In the opposite way, I think every person who finds themselves depressed also succumb to the spiral disease, but these people become snails, specifically. So maybe in this chapter, when the boy first turns into a snail, he could have just had depression of some kind. I mean, look, he woke up late every morning and was always late to class, and was bullied like hell. And then later on, when the town is basically destroyed, the people who turn into snails are the people who run out of steam. They're desperate, they're hopeless, they realize that you can't escape town, they just lose any sense of objective for their lives. But then I would say that when the boys bully and his teacher becomes snails themselves, I don't think it's because they had the depression side of the illness. I think they had the obsession side of the illness because they grew obsessed with snails after seeing what happened to the first snail. In a weird way, it's like opposite symptoms leading to the exact same physical state. I know this sounds crazy, but look at the source material! Throughout the book, we see more and more ways in which obsession transforms the more vulnerable people of Kurozucho through the spiral disease. It can be reversed though, or at least managed, because like we see with Kirie's dad and her brother, both of them had very short stints where they were obsessed with something, but then Kirie intervenes and then they kind of ease off, and the spirals inside of them die back down. Eventually though, the disease begins to exceed human hosts. We start to see it in the lighthouse, the hurricane over the town, we see it in the mud in the pond, and the ceramics that come from that. Like I said, it's almost like a radiation in every single inch of every single place. It permeates the ground and the air and the people, even the mosquitoes. Let's go back to Shuichi for a second. I know that some of you might ask, well, if you think he was patient 0 and he has the disease, then why didn't he succumb as the first person to the curse? Why don't you think he's asymptomatic like Kirie is? I think Shuichi does exhibit symptoms. His obsession is the disease itself. He is obsessed with the curse. Ironically, I think the way his disease manifests its symptoms is by making the curse worse around him and Kirie. That's why he has the power to point stuff out and then it comes true later on. He's the one who finds a galaxy that never existed, and then he curses the galaxy, and then suddenly everyone's crazy about astronomy. It's because Shuichi is obsessed with fear of the spiral, so that's what consumes him, and that's exactly why it comes true. He talks about Kirie's hair, so his symptoms made Kirie's hair turn curly because that's the object of his obsession, protecting Kirie from this spiral curse that only he talks about. And like everyone else, his obsession with the spiral curse does consume him. He's there to protect his girlfriend, so of course he's the one who inevitably falls before Kirie does. In a way, I think this can be an explanation for why the very first hurricane tried to suck up Kirie. When Kirie is sitting with him on the beach, he feels a very slight breeze and immediately starts running and screaming about typhoons, and sure enough, there's a typhoon that happens to be targeting her. This is Shuichi's personal fears manifested through the disease because his obsession, again, is the spiral and how it can affect him and Kirie. Why his symptoms seem to be greater and more dangerous than anyone else's symptoms, I don't know. But I guess it's good because they don't actually affect him but the world around him. By the time we get to chapter 13 and onward, Kirie starts encountering people who are already sick somehow, even without her and Shuichi spreading the disease. Because at this point, the entire population has become an incubator for the spiral to take hold. Think of it like a dormant gene, and it's just a matter of whether obsession or depression will trigger the full transformation of the gene. Her brother turned into a snail right after he got trapped underneath debris for a whole night by himself. That's enough to make anyone start to give up on life. No wonder the symptoms started to take hold in him. But those guys up on the mountaintop who became obsessed with eating snails, they literally started curling in on themselves because of how giddy they were about eating more snails. The people in the row houses are so obsessed with security and not being forcibly uprooted that they inevitably become secure by tangling themselves together and losing the ability to move. Let's not forget the spirals don't just affect humans. It's in the ocean nearby, it's in the mountaintops. It's affecting time itself around the town. And, obviously, the town literally becomes self-quarantined, and people can enter the zone, but cannot leave it once they're infected. I think a huge reason why Kirie and so many others don't succumb to the sickness early on, even if they carry it, is because they simply don't have obsession or depression to trigger the infection. Kirie is nothing but level-headed and fair to everyone around her. She is nothing but content with her life and happy all the time, even though she's going through distress. She seems to bounce back so freaking quickly. Meanwhile, Shuichi throughout the book turns into a literal husk of a person, but he never turns into a snail because he has Kirie to look after. Kirie always maintains neutrality. She always tries to give the situation the benefit of the doubt. And most importantly, especially in the final chapters, she makes sure to give herself a goal. I think her perfect blend of passivity and gentleness and refusal to become aggressive or angry is what saves her and lets her outlast every single person in her town. And by the end, she actively chooses to let the symptoms overtake her because she and Shuichi are so actively exhausted. The final phase of this contagion is pure solidification, turning to stone the way that Kirie saw her parents turn to stone the longer they were in the cave. So then at the end of the series, the creature senses that the two of them are the very last ones, which is very fitting since they were the carriers, and they've helped usher in the downfall of Kudozucho unwittingly and innocently. So all of this to what end? I don't know. Maybe the creature was hungry. Maybe this is how it eats. It reminds me of spiders who, I'm pretty sure they inject their prey with acid to liquefy them or something, and then they slurp them up. I think the creature maybe operates similarly. It has to weaken the humans by oozing out this reality-shifting disease, and then literally through the row houses, it slurps up the population of Kudozucho in one gulp. Maybe this is a weird way that the creature has to grow itself. Maybe it has to use the solidified organic bodies of frozen town citizens to make itself build more spiral cities. And there are loose ends, like, why does the disease take so long to gestate? Like, why now? And also, this disease apparently can't spread for some reason. Like, Shuichi and other people are going outside of the town every other day, so not sure why other towns don't have this. And I don't know why a creature would send out this disease if part of it has the potential to be too strong for some people. Like, Azami straight up died. She's not in Dragonfly Pond. She is dead. But then again, some people who do die, their ashes get sent to the pond anyway. So some people did still make it to the cavern, whether in spirit or in body. And I'm assuming that when Kirie and the others are gone for years, I guess that gave the snail people enough time to crawl their way to the center of the pond too. So I am assuming that Kirie and Shuichi really were the very last people alive, because maybe her brother and other snails had already gone inside the cave, even though we don't see any snail people in there. So yeah, this is just my weird-ass theory. Uzumaki is about a multidimensional, radiation-like disease spewed out by an underground creature in order to feed itself with an entire town of people. And this disease is triggered by obsession or depression, and our two main characters were the first undiagnosed patients of the disease itself. And even on the back of the book, it does say that the town is contaminated with spirals, so maybe in a subliminal way, I was already gonna be drawn to this theory anyway. But that's enough for analysis. I'm gonna let you digest that for the rest of the video, because now all the big brain stuff is over, and we're gonna talk about the Uzumaki adaptations that exist in the world. There were two video games that came out in the year 2000, both of which were released for a console called the WonderSwan. I don't know what that console is, but I do know that I cannot afford a $300 listing on eBay to get this game. I found footage of the games, but they were never translated, so this is all we have. They seem to be purely text-based games with limited choice options, so unfortunately I cannot say much about them. But I can talk about the Uzumaki film, which was free on Amazon Prime. I was so surprised they even had it. I didn't even know this movie existed before making this video. The film came out in early 2000. Must have been a lot of hype for Uzumaki back in the year 2000. I think that's when the final chapters were rolling out. Y'all, the movie is wild. Here's how I would describe it. Visually gorgeous and bizarre, but narratively incomplete. First, the color grading is beautiful. The entire movie is mostly dichromatic, washed in greens with occasional pops of dull red or burgundy. And then every now and then they throw in this really stark white. The movie is kind of cheesy. The camera moves in spiral motions at times. And there are a few instances where they've tried to put a tiny little spiral distortion filter effect on the footage. And some of the camera angles are ridiculous. There are many times where I laughed out loud because of the goofy elements. Like, what is this transition when she gets home from the grocer? The goofiness is fine, since Junji Ito's writing can be outlandish and goofy sometimes. This is how he draws himself a lot at the very end of his books. He does these cute little autobiographical comics where he makes fun of himself and his own work. So it's fun that this movie has a weird self-awareness to it. It even throws in a wanted poster of Junji Ito, which, okay. The movie isn't really a comedy horror, I don't think, but some moments feel so campy. Like, the acting is very theatrical and very heavy. At first I hated it, but I think it goes all the way around to being stylized, especially as I view this now in the year 2024, when like every horror movie is clean cut and formulaic, and they all have the same annoying dark blue color grading, and the visibility is at 2% unless you're watching it in a vacuum and a sensory deprivation tank at the same time. Despite the comedic elements, there are moments where I was genuinely disturbed, like my skin was crawling. In a way, the age of the movie lends to the creepiness in and of itself. Like, there are so many stretches of time where there's no music whatsoever, and that always leaves me on edge. Also, because it's so old, I was like, I don't know what the hell they're gonna do at any given point in this movie. It is so unpredictable. There's a strange lack of information. The movie is so obscure that I clicked on the actor for Shuichi and no one has any information on them other than the fact that they have an Instagram. They make pottery. But good luck finding anything else about them. The set design was so sparse, probably due to budget, but the stillness of it felt very dollhouse-like to me, and the movement of the actors and the way that they perfectly play to the camera also feels very staged and doll-like, which I enjoyed. The CGI and post-production effects are ambitious, but I think they're stylized enough to where it feels okay in some areas, even if a little bit cheesy in other areas. But sometimes they nail it on the head, and a lot of the effects are very beautiful and painterly, and like you want to buy into it because you feel like someone was actually behind this, as opposed to, you know, the cold and calculated perfect CGI that we have now. It has personality. As for narrative, it's relatively close to Uzumaki, while also completely walking all over the source material at the end. This movie released right before the final chapters were published, so it genuinely was going in blind. Even though I don't know why they didn't just wait a few more months until the series was finished. Because I looked, and this entire movie was filmed in 2 damn weeks. Like, yeah, you could have waited a few more months until Junji Ito wrapped up the series. Shuichi is like cut and combed and zipped. Like, why did they make this man look so sharp and clean? He also has this fuck-ass bob of a haircut, which makes me laugh, but it works on him, I think. This is a small thing, but you do not see this in Western movies a lot. They actually let their actors retain their unique physical traits. And I know that sounds wild, but seriously, Shuichi's actor has a mole on their nose, and Kirie's actress has a few moles on her chin, and they actually don't choose to obliterate these physical details like you know they would do in Hollywood. The movie starts by introducing Yamaguchi.
Yeah! Yamaguchi-kun!
びっくりした？
え？
びっくりしたみたいだね。小島くん、僕と付き合ってくれないか？
え？ごめんなさい。私本当に急いでるの。じゃあね。
A lot of the conversations do match up with the books pretty well, like Shuichi and Kirie's first scene on the swing set. Shuichi's dad, I think they cast him perfectly. But Kirie's dad, ooh. This is not my daddy Goshima, it can't be. In the movie, of course, Shuichi's dad is obsessed with the spiral, but they have him using a camcorder to record things, which I guess is kind of cool. It does make it much creepier. They decided to completely take out Kirie's mother and brother, which, okay, I guess. They also try and make this movie a watered-down love story, where Kirie and Shuichi aren't dating yet, but they literally have, like, baby pictures shared together, and they've known each other since birth, apparently. Like in the book, a boy falls down and dies in their school, but in the movie, he dies via a staircase fall and not the roof. Sekino talks about how she wants this level of attention, just like she did in the book. Remember, this is the girl who eventually grows her hair into curly tendrils. But the way this actress plays Sekino is...
彼は幸せだったのよ。他人から注目されるってすごく幸せなことじゃない？ねえ、あなたたちはそう思わない？
I love her aesthetic. I gotta say, I think we do need to bring back accessories for glasses. And she puts out her cigarette. And it explodes! Why? Throughout the movie, Yamaguchi increasingly becomes a little villain. He's going yandere mode, like, what is this boy worried about? There's no reason to be doing all this. There's this beautiful moment where you can see Shuichi's dad and his spiral collection. Props to the props department for real. At some point he even has on like a tiny spiral sweater, which made me laugh. Then they try and tackle the eye scene with the father, but The sound effects push it over the top. They lost me. And the eyes grew like 20 times bigger, so how am I supposed to find this scary? They started to do a teaser for the Snail Boys, and I was like, oh my god, yes, introduce the Snail Boys. Show me a snail transformation with 2000s movies effects. For some reason, this actor for the teacher made such a bold character choice. He's like 3 steps away from having a nervous breakdown. The snail kid does pay off. We do see the snails, but we never get that beautiful snailgbtq plus scene of them laying eggs together, so what's the point? Yamaguchi keeps popping up everywhere and antagonizing Kirie, and he gives her the jack-in-the-box finally. She tosses it out into the rain, and there's a really cool shot of the toy that I liked. I thought it was nice and creepy. There is a super long drawn-out scene where Kirie is the one who finds Shuichi's dad curled up in a washing machine. But they never even show it, although there is a scene later on where Kirie has a nightmare and sees herself in the machine. I will say that every single time Shuichi opens his mouth, every dialogue line is so hollow.
大丈夫か顔色悪いぞこうなることはなんとなく予感していたから
At first I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but it's like, ugh, oh girl, give us nothing. Give us less than nothing. At the funeral, there's this moment where Shuichi's mom sees the smoke thing happen, and they did it pretty accurately, like I was impressed. While she's screaming though, they cut to her having like bugged out eyes. What the fuck? This scared me. It scared me because it was so jarring. I hated it. And just like the book, his mom is hospitalized, and she has the whole like inner ear thing happen, and there's some really cool visual effects here. I do like it. It feels weirdly like a video game. For some reason, the movie throws in a random reporter character who is not in the original series whatsoever, and he never does anything in this movie. He does like 2 minutes of investigation. His entire character comes to nothing. He dies halfway through the movie. I think he should have been cast as Kirie's dad, because look at him. There are moments where we see Shuichi's father's ghost, and he has like a swollen tongue. Look at him, he's so silly! There are also really cool shots where Kirie is riding home in a car, and there's this cool first-person POV that I liked. Kirie's dad is acting weird, just like he did in the books. This is a small thing, but like back to Shuichi's mom in the hospital. After she has the fingerprint thing happen, there's this weird sped-up movement, like the same effect that Twilight does to try and show vampiric super speed. It's so stupid. I do not know why they did this. Then we get a sort of montage of things happening. Sekino has her hair, going crazy. Her curls look so plastic. I love it. Yamaguchi does the jump in front of a moving vehicle challenge, and the image here is so dramatic. Like, these images are such soap opera levels of editing. Flashbangs, zooming in on stuff, cutting and pasting. I couldn't help but laugh at it. But that's the last that we see of Yamaguchi. The movie does not do the jack-in-the-box thing with him, which was the entire point of even adding his story in. Like, why did they bother? The only thing they do is make a spiral on the windshield. And by the way, this is what kills the reporter guy, because he was the one driving the car. There is a cool shot where the teacher's grading student papers and starts drawing spirals. A news crew is reporting on things happening around town.
こんにちは、丸山千恵です。まず第一に、なんと人間の大きさほどもある。クローズ町での怪奇現象はこれだけではなかったのです。 渦巻き模様なのです。
この街ももう終わりだ。
This like found footage shaky cam effect is so obviously inspired by the Blair Witch Project, which I think came out a few months prior. And I guess that also probably explains why they did this green wash over everything too, like some sort of faux night vision camera effect. And the way they did this cremation smoke and the face in the smoke was pretty good. Back to the reporters, I think she's supposed to be Chie, and she mentions a typhoon hitting town, but like that doesn't even pay off in the end of the movie. We are almost done with the movie, and yet they have only focused on like the first 5 chapters of the book, even though I'm pretty sure 15 or more had to have been out by the time they started filming. Kirie and Shuichi are trying to find her father when suddenly Shuichi falls and breaks his ankles or something, because when this happened I was so confused and I couldn't stop laughing.
父さん
The movie carries on like nothing happened, but he does walk back in and he says that he's been got by the spiral. The spiral got him. Kirie keeps being like, what do you mean? Girl, don't you hear the post-production music swelling up? He's about to die.
お前だけでもいいけど、俺はもうダメだ。
いやよ修一くん
But then he like becomes possessed and his forehead turns red. He got a little fever going on. His head's spinning backwards and shit. He's like twisting. And what the hell are these stupid Michael Jackson Thriller hands that he's doing to try and like convince Kirie to come into the spiral? And he's so silly. He's so silly. We don't see what happens to Kirie at the end. They fully cop out and they give us static images of the town. They don't even give us a hurricane. They don't even show us Azami, the main visual draw of Junji Ito Uzumaki, which happens in like chapter 3, so they should know about the story of Azami, but they didn't put her in here. So the pictures they show us are like the crashed reporter van, which I guess is supposed to be Chie, and they all turn to snails. Okay. And then we have Sekino on the telephone pole as a skeleton, and I gotta say, I do love this image and the stuttering effect of the camera. But if you're only watching the movie and had never read Uzumaki, you would have no idea why she died. In the book, she dies because her hair sucks the life out of her at the end of the chapter, but that's never mentioned in the movie. The Wikipedia page tries to say that she was electrocuted, but that's wrong, according to what the book said. The Wikipedia page also says this image is of Kirie's dad, who drilled a hole into his eye, but no, I think this is the police officer that they introduced in the beginning of the movie, because a few scenes before the end of the movie, I think it was him who was staring down the barrel of his own gun because it was a spiral shape. I don't even think we see Kirie's dad at all because we get one shot of his clay bucket floating to the top of the pond, and everything ends on a shot of the eye of the storm. Ultimately, a very disappointing and confusing narrative, but a very fascinating and wild ride. I think I loved it all the way up until like the last 15 minutes because, you know, the non-existent plot and the loose ends. I'm just so surprised they chose to do the snail kids with their budget instead of doing Azami and her spiral face. And then to kill off Shuichi at the end so conveniently, just like, oh, whatever, and then he died, and then Kirie fucking left, whatever the fuck. Like, they do not care. At least the music is a bop. I was listening to the soundtrack while working on this script, and I loved it. So that's everything I have on Uzumaki and Uzumaki-related media. Side note, I just found out that Tomie has 9 movies? So if you want me to do a Tomie movie night video, then get your popcorn and start commenting down below because I am so down for that. Conclusions. What could I even say that I didn't already say at the end of Tomie? I think the heart of Junji Ito's work is the ambiguity of where the monster comes from. In fact, most of the time there is no monster. There are just forces, just things that exist or have existed for longer than we know, and we can't change them. American horror loves to solve a problem. It loves to finish a puzzle. It loves to find something that can be reversed and then mitigated in the future. We love to unmask the monster. And then we love to shoot it. But here in Junji Ito's world, you don't have a monster. Or even if you do and you see it, you're not going to get any answers. This series is about the pain and the horror of being involved in something that you can't get out of. Something that is genuinely bigger than you and has more influence than you will ever have over yourself. Like Kirie and Shuichi, even if you do keep a level head and you preserve your sanity, the influence the spiral has over everything still outweighed and outplayed them. The two of them will die sane, and I suppose that's the only consolation they have, that they will die with their mentality intact at the very least. As the audience, what lesson do we draw from that? I'm not sure. Is it better to die instantly in the snap trap or run deeper and deeper into the glue trap? That's for you to decide, friend, because that's all I got and that's the end of the video. Stop before you click off of this video. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for watching. I love you. And second of all, I have created a Patreon account after many months of fighting with myself back and forth about the ethics of self-promotion under capitalism and the current dystopia in which I live in the country of America at this time, in the year of our spaghetti lord, 2024. I asked myself many questions. I asked you all, my subscribers, many questions. I crunched the numbers. I did the surveys. I made the polls. I was out there among the people. So yeah, I made a Patreon. I could probably write an essay about the very complicated things I feel about being an artist, and I have this deeply, deeply seated misconception inside of myself that unless I absolutely wow the world, and unless I am better than everyone else, I cannot just ask people to support me, which is something that I'm working on. I can say for sure the very first thing I'm going to do is probably invest in a better microphone, because the one I have now is like pretty decent, but oh my god, it's too good. It captures every slimy piece of spittle and every lisp and every single striation of whatever the hell my mouth does whenever I speak out loud. So yeah, definitely striving towards that hashtag streamer, hashtag gamer, hashtag podcaster setup. Anyway, okay, if you stuck around to hear all of this, thank you very much, and I shall meet you again in the next one. Goodbye.